So let me see if anyone has any questions. I don't think you do. No. All right. So in Ferguson versus City of Charleston, the Medical Center of the University of South Carolina noticed an increase in the use of cocaine by patients receiving prenatal care. So they started to cooperate with the City of Charleston to formulate a policy to prosecute mothers whose children tested positive for drugs at birth. So a number of the Medical University of South Carolina's patients were arrested after testing positive for cocaine. They filed suit, ultimately, claiming that the policy was in essence a warrantless and non-consensual search conducted solely for the purposes of criminal investigation. The argument being that these searches were not warranted and they were done exclusively for the purpose of prosecuting women. And because of that, they were unconstitutional. So what is the issue in this case? This is a different issue than any we've covered in this class. And that the question is whether a hospital's performance of a diagnostic test used to obtain evidence of a patient's conduct, an unreasonable search in violation of the 14th Amendment, if the patient has not consented to the procedure and the results of the procedure are given to law enforcement. Because in this case, what was happening is individuals were tested for drug use, usually upon giving birth. And if those tests were positive, they were handed over to the local sheriff's department, who were then charging these women with drug abuse, among other crimes. And so in a 6-3 decision, Stevens writes the majority opinion. And Stevens says that absolutely, this is a clinical example of an unreasonable search, because the intent of the search is solely for the purpose of criminal punishment, that it provided no diagnostic background. And if it did provide a diagnostic background, it should be used solely for that diagnostic background. But in this case, the handing over the searches, the partnership and the handing over of these diagnostic tests to the local police department was a violation of the Fourth Amendment. In the dissent, Scalia, who often can provide an interesting interpretation, certainly does so in this case, because he argues, interestingly enough, that there's absolutely no search in this case because the hospital did not take the urine, which is how the test was done, without the patient's consent. Now, they didn't necessarily ask them, but he argues that the urine by its very nature is a product of waste, which would be abandoned, and that individuals could simply come across of it and do whatever they would of it as though they found simple garbage lying on the sidewalk. And because of that, it wasn't a search, because the product that was taken was ultimately going to be abandoned. He also went on to say that even if women had been coerced into providing these samples, that the important actionable point is that it was not the government coercing them. And that these samples were provided on the precondition of receiving care. But the actual action that was taking place is these doctors, nurses, the hospital in general, were engaging these searches and handing them over to law enforcement. for the sole purposes of criminal punishment. Now, is there a diagnostic reason why you would want to perform drug searches on individuals who have just given birth? Absolutely, because it's diagnostic about how to treat the child after birth. But the point at which the state gets involved and uses it for criminal purposes, that search itself becomes problematic under the Fourth Amendment. And in a 6-3 majority, the court pretty clearly articulates that point of view. One of, I think, the court, especially with the addition of Gorsuch and Kavanaugh today, would still agree with.